It was an announcement that those covering the execution of Billy Ray Irick knew would come, but not when. No indication at the time that this minute outside Riverbend Maximum Security Institution, behind the hum of generators, was exactly when Irick's lethal injection was beginning. And minutes later, as Riverbend staff covered the front door, this was the moment the warden was shouting Irick's name to see if he was still conscious.
I will remember for a long time the warden shouting his name while he laid there. He shouted, "Billy, Billy," and he was laying there on the gurney.
Questions still remain, and so does a lawsuit filed by Irick himself and other death row inmates surrounding the drugs used to kill him yesterday, asking if the drugs not only inflict pain on the dying inmate, but also mask it. Judges have said Irick's attorneys were not able to prove that, but media witnesses said they likely wouldn't be able to tell.
One of the drugs that he's given is a paralytic, so, if he was in excruciating pain, I don't think we would know. And that's probably something that's going to keep me up tonight. So,
with so much still unknown, those waiting and watching learned one certainty last night. At 7:48 p.m., right now, Billy Ray Irick was pronounced dead. Jason Lamb, News Channel 5.
Right now, lethal injection and electrocution are the two ways Tennessee can carry out the death penalty. But is there a more humane method? Well, a new lawsuit filed this week says yes. But News Channel 5's Jason Lamb tells us it's a method with an emergency backup plan that includes a point-blank shot to the head.
A lawsuit filed this week compares lethal injection in Tennessee to being burned alive from the inside and liquid fire. So this lawsuit suggests a different method of execution. The federal lawsuit challenges the constitutionality of the lethal injection method used to kill Billy Ray Irick and is scheduled to kill 2 others by the end of the year, saying Irick was aware of pain and suffering for 3 to 4 minutes. It's an argument that's been made before, but new in this lawsuit, the attorney for 4 death row inmates suggests alternate methods of execution, including a firing squad, something not allowed currently in Tennessee.
The legislature would have to approve that. The court could not order them to be killed by a firing squad even if they wanted to.
The lawsuit suggests the state could follow a protocol listed in a 1959 manual for U.S. military executions by firing squad, something the military doesn't allow currently. If the shots from the firing squad don't kill a condemned prisoner, the protocol contains a backup plan in case of human error or mistake, what the manual calls the coup de grace, a handgun shot to the head, holding the muzzle just above the ear and 1 foot from the head. All this, the lawsuit says, would significantly reduce the substantial risk of harm to an inmate compared to lethal injection. In light of that, could a federal court ban lethal injection and electrocution in Tennessee? Attorney David Rabin says it's a stretch, but it may be one of the last arguments the inmates can make.
These defendants are running out of legal options here.
Should the state continue to execute death row inmates using its current lethal injection chemical cocktail? That is the question the state's highest court now has to decide. In the Tennessee Supreme Court today, attorneys for 33 death row inmates argue the first drug the state uses in its 3-drug lethal injection combination does not sedate inmates enough, leaving them to feel the painful effects of the other drugs. Pain inmates say amounts to torture.
Just within the last half hour, we learned that Zagorski wants to die by the electric chair if the execution is to move forward. Inmates who sign a waiver and committed their crime before 1999 are allowed to choose the chair. Speaking on behalf of the convicted killer, Zagorski's attorney says the method is the lesser of 2 evils and, quote, 10 to 18 minutes of drowning, suffocation, and chemical burning is unspeakable.
I'm going to read a brief statement, and then they'll be followed by the media witnesses. They'll come out shortly, okay? The death sentence of Edmund Zagorski was carried out by means of electrocution on November 1st, 2018, in accordance with the states of Tennessee.
I'm Jason Lamb. I'm a reporter with News Channel 5, WTVF. A lot of what has already been said goes along with my notes. We were in the dark for several minutes in the witness room while we were able to hear the distinct sounds of what sounded like a water bucket being brought around, a ratcheting sound like you would hear with handcuffs being put on or taken off someone. The blinds raised, and you could see Mr. Zagorski there looking out at us, at the folks in the witness room directly ahead of him. Then the warden said, quote, "Mr. Zagorski, do you have any last words at this time?" And that's when Mr. Zagorski said, "Let's rock." He then, as others described, between a grimace and a grin, as this large sponge was put over his head, along with the helmet, the headpiece. This is a large sponge covering probably larger than the size of his entire head, that went over his own head and underneath the headpiece. Let me just go through my notes here. He was wearing white TDOC trousers with a dark stripe down the side that said Tennessee Department of Correction, and a yellow shirt. And he did seem to wave his hand or raise his left hand up as this whole process was continuing, including after the cloth, the shroud, was put over his face. It was a extremely large, square, black cloth that was sort of pinned to the headpiece to mask his entire face down past his chin. Before the shroud was put in place, I noticed he was raising his eyebrows at times, and again, between grimacing and smiling, grimacing when the salt water came down over his face. I asked, and he seemed to be communicating to his attorney, who was sitting next to me at the time, Kelly Henry. I asked her about that after the execution had finished. As he was putting his eyebrows up, the attorney sitting to my right was nodding, smiling, and tapping her heart. And I asked her what that meant, and she said, quote, "I told him when I put my hand over my heart, that was me holding him in my heart." And the execution proceeded after he had the shroud over his face. Again, as others have said, it was a sharp jolt upwards with his fists clenched for 20 seconds. And then as the electricity was shut off, he sort of slumped back down and remained motionless. And then after the pause, it was re-energized, the chair was re-energized, and he lifted back up even higher. And then after it was over, his body just slumped back down again with his pinky finger sort of resting on the edge of the chair handle.
Along with a number of members of the media was our own Jason Lamb, who was inside of this execution chamber. Jason, this is not something most people see in the entirety of their lifetime.
Yeah, this was definitely a first for me. I think I'm okay right now. This was something that, of course, we knew could have been a possibility, but it was definitely very surreal to finally be here in a moment where we are witnessing this. And I had never covered something like this before, to the point of where we could be potentially seeing not just a lethal injection in Tennessee, but an electrocution. So that was certainly something that I am still trying to process right now. Again, like I said, I think I'm all right for the time being. I'm okay right now, but certainly I'll be processing this in the days to come.
Jason, earlier tonight you mentioned that Edmund Zagorski was either grimacing or grinning just before he was electrocuted. Can you talk about not only his demeanor, but also the demeanor of the guards and the other workers in that room?
Yeah, that was something that really surprised me too. The smiling or the grinning or the grimacing. We now know that the grinning was an attempt to communicate with his attorney, who he was trying to also get to smile at the time, and then the grimacing came with the saltwater sponge, and as the saltwater came down, cascading over his face, sort of getting in his eyes and face at the time. As far as the other people in the room, there were 3 specific individuals, the warden and then 2 other high-ranking officers in the room during the actual electrocution. They were all dressed in suits. 2 of them had pocket squares, and you could tell that they had just practiced this time and time again. You could tell this was being done exactly by the book. They were looking straight forward or down at the ground while this was taking place, not necessarily looking at Mr. Zagorski as this was happening, but you could tell this is something that they had practiced and had done by the book.
Jason, his last words were, "Let's rock," and I know you were sitting next to his lawyer during this. Did she have any insight into those words?
She didn't speak specifically about what those words might mean, but I think it's pretty clear from the description she gave afterwards that this was a man who had come to terms with what was about to happen to him. So I think maybe those words might have just been an indication of that finality, that fact that he knew what was about to happen. And in fact, he was, like I had said, trying to communicate with his attorney in not only smiling, but then I looked over at the attorney who was sitting next to me, and she was smiling back at him and had her hand patting on her heart. And she had afterwards told us that that meant that they had already talked about before, that meant when he saw that, that was her holding him in her heart.
Jason, thank you for your live coverage tonight.